I stood in the church and couldn't believe this was happening to me. I was marrying a dwarf. Calm down. You need to be patient a little. I get the lead role and I get divorced right away, and it's good for the dwarf. His name is Nick. He is a famous director, but no one gave him money for a new project. Then, his rich mother offered to pay for the shooting, but only if the son gets married. Just recently, I graduated from the Theater Institute and immediately waited for the main roles, but they only called me as an extra, and when the dwarf offered me a deal, a movie role in exchange for a fake wedding, I immediately agreed. As soon as the ceremony was over, I saw a missed call from Dylan, my real boyfriend. We met on the set, and it was love at first sight. God, I don't want Dylan to know what I'm up to. He's a real nutcase. I lied to the guests that I needed to get some air and went outside. Just as I was about to call, someone called out to me. I almost dropped my phone in fright, but when I turned around, I saw the dwarf. Nick thanked me for my help, and then we heard a click of heels. Nick's mother, Helen, came up to us. Hell, what if she heard us and realized that the marriage was a sham? But my mother-in-law smiled and said that we were a very beautiful couple. I immediately sat down and hugged Nick. Yes, we are perfect for each other. My mother-in-law nodded approvingly and asked what we were planning for our honeymoon. Nick and I looked at each other blankly. Immediately, she offered not to go anywhere and spend it in their luxurious mansion. Real family life, isn't it great? I was really scared. What mansion? I have a shoot. And if his mother suspects a trick? Nick looked flustered and gave his mom a confused thank you. There was no choice. I also played along. Right after the wedding, we went to the mansion. I hope it won't last long, but when I saw the house, I gasped. His mother clearly had money. She led us to our bedroom. After all, a husband and wife should live together. To sleep next to a dwarf? I was furious, but there was no choice. We needed this money for the movie. After a while, my mother-in-law called us into the kitchen and said that we would cook dinner together, like a real family. But I couldn't stand cooking. It was easier to order sushi. I whispered this to Nick, to which he replied that he was also a complete zero in cooking. Love is known in the kitchen. The mother-in-law joked viciously. While I was chopping onions and crying, Nick was trying to lighten the mood. And he started chuckling carrots. What a weirdo. I even thought it was funny. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. The screen flashed, "Sweetheart." I almost had a heart attack. What if his mother sees? I grabbed the phone, nearly knocking over the frying pan. I promised Dylan I'd meet him today. Come on, you're an actress. I slapped my forehead and said I needed to go to an important casting call. His mother gave me a suspicious look, but I had already called a taxi. Dylan was already waiting for me at the restaurant. When I arrived, he asked Hartley why I wasn't wearing a dress. After all, he liked my figure. I kissed my beloved and apologized. There was no time to choose an outfit. Dylan frowned, but then he took my hand. And he said he wanted to move in with me. Oh, I've been waiting for this for so long. But now I almost howled in frustration. Dylan didn't know I'd move in with the dwarf for a month. I had to lie that I was now living with my sick aunt who needed to be taken care of. Dylan didn't say anything and only asked me to pay when the bill arrived. He forgot his wallet. Could happen to anyone. He offered to drop me off. I felt guilty for not agreeing to move in. So I nodded. He would take me to the mansion and then I would figure something out. When we arrived, I asked him to slow down. My aunt needed to rest. We shouldn't wake her up. We said our goodbyes in a hurry, and I dashed into the house. If only no one would see. In the dark, I couldn't get the key into the lock. Finally, I did it. I was almost to the bedroom when the lights came on. My mother-in-law was standing in front of me in a nightgown. She stared at me reproachfully. Where have you been for so long? I blurted out the first thing that came to my mind. I was just going for a run. A wife should keep herself in shape. My mother-in-law narrowed her eyes. In that case, she would be happy to keep me company. What? She quickly changed her clothes and we ran. I was hoping she'd just run out of steam. But no, my mother-in-law passed me and I was barely able to walk. After our run, I was so exhausted that I barely made it to bed. Nick decided to sleep on the floor, for which I was grateful. But a couple of hours later, my mother-in-law knocked on the door. I jumped up and started waking Nick up. She can't see that we're sleeping apart. His mother was already turning the doorknob. There was nothing to do. I grabbed sleeping Nick and dragged him to the bed with all my strength. At that moment, Helen came into the room. My mother-in-law looked at us sharply and then suddenly announced that she had another surprise. Again? I was tired of her surprises. She handed over some certificates and said, "Family life is not only a routine, but also a joint experience. We're going to jump with a parachute." Nick yawned, and I broke out in a sweat. I was scared to death of heights. But Nick whispered, "We don't spend much time together. Your mother-in-law will suspect something. You can't refuse." We gathered and waited for his mother, but after a couple of minutes, she came out and said that her plans had changed. We would have to go ourselves. Was she kidding us? Nick noticed that I was worried, and he tried to lighten the mood all the way. Okay, maybe it was not so scary, but when I saw the helicopter where we were supposed to jump from, I found it hard to breathe. I don't want to go there. Suddenly, Nick put his arm around me and gently asked me what was going on, and I admitted that I was very afraid of heights. But Nick said it was okay. Anyway, why would we do that if Mom was not here? But she said to spend time together. That's what we'll do, Nick said with a sly smile. We spent the rest of the day at the amusement park. Nick tried to cheer me up, bought me cotton candy, and joked about everything. Even about his small stature, to which I replied he had a huge soul. And then I stumbled. I used to be repelled by Nick's appearance, but today I never thought about it. It turned out that he was caring, kind, and had a lot to talk about. When we returned home, laughing, I even thought my mother-in-law smiled at the sight of us. In the evening, we chatted for a long time, and then Nick said that he was having fun with me, but he used to feel lonely. That's understandable. I'm a dwarf, he continued. But I protested. That's not the point. I also often feel sad, but everything is fine with my stature. And I wondered, why did I say that? I have a boyfriend, Dylan. Then I realized that I never had a heart-to-heart conversation with him like this. The thought terrified me. I said goodnight to Nick and turned back to the wall. The next day, Nick and I went grocery shopping on his mother's behalf. And when we got back, my jaw almost dropped. My mother-in-law was sitting with Dylan, drinking tea. What's happening? I didn't understand, but Dylan came up to me and put his arm around me and said he was very happy to meet my aunt. Then he kissed me on the cheek and added, "I wish you dwarf to find a girl like my beauty." This was a failure. I looked at my mother-in-law in horror. She told me to get out of there with my boyfriend. Nick was silent. Tears began to well up in my eyes. I was so close to crying, and Dylan still didn't know what had happened. In the street, he said that my family would calm down soon and we would be able to move, and we wouldn't even have to pay rent. While I was trying to collect my thoughts, he called us a taxi. We drove in silence, but on arrival, Dylan again asked me to pay. He said he forgot his wallet again. It was like a slap in my face. Wait, are you dating me just so I can pay for you everywhere? Dylan chuckled. Well, it certainly wasn't because of my personality. In tears, I shouted that we were breaking up. How could I ever love this jerk? I went back to my apartment and cried for a long time. Something snapped inside me. But I was awakened by the rumbling of my own stomach. I had to go to the store. Out of habit, I went to the department of semi-finished products, but suddenly stopped in front of the shelf with onions, remembering how we cooked with the whole family, albeit fake. God, did I miss them? But at home, I couldn't eat a morsel. Nick would definitely support me right now. The thought of him warmed my heart. Why did I think about him so often? Then my phone vibrated. It was Nick. I picked up the phone and was about to apologize when he excitedly informed me that my mother-in-law was in the hospital. I jumped. What happened? Nick muttered that she had a heart problem, that her last wish was to see me. There was no time to think, so I rushed to the hospital. My mother-in-law was unconscious and Nick was sitting by her bed, looking sad. He looked at me and said with a sad smile that he was sorry it had ended like this. We were a happy family, though not a real one, but he understood me. I had a boyfriend. Normal, not a dwarf. A lump rose in my throat. I'm sorry, it's all my fault. Nick, you know, if we could start over, it would be different. He was about to say something, but then my mother-in-law moved. We jumped in surprise, and she smiled and cheerfully got up from the bed. What's happening? His mother laughed. Since everyone was here, there was no need to stay in the hospital. We were going home. Nick and I looked at each other blankly. Then his mother admitted that she pretended to be ill in order to unite the family. You actors can pretend to be married, but I can't be an actress. She added that she was sure from the very beginning that Nick and I were made for each other. I looked at Nick, smiling, and everything fell into place. As we drove home, I felt happy for the first time in a long time. I had a family, a home, a real husband who really needed me. On the way, Nick received a text message and he suddenly broke into a smile. There were investors who were ready to finance his movie. His mother's money was no longer needed. He looked at me and asked if I would play the lead role in the movie. I was happy, but after thinking about it, I said that I would go to the casting like everyone else, and I winked if our family doesn't mind a working wife. But it wasn't the role that made me happy that night. I looked at Nick and saw him not as a scary dwarf, but as a loved one. It turned out that the looks can often be deceiving, but now I was definitely not fooled. The phone vibrated. It was Kaya, my sister. She was panicking, saying something about her boyfriend, a bed, some kind of basement. She begged to be saved, but then the connection was abruptly cut off. What? Again? My sister was always playing pranks, which made me mad. I always rushed to the rescue, but time after time, I only ran into my sister's pranks. I won't be fooled this time. I called her back, but she didn't pick up. I called her 100 times. What if it was serious this time? Kai was so convincing. But if it was a hoax again, I would just destroy her. I was going to look for her, but as I passed her room, I noticed an open laptop on the table. There was her conversation with Mitch on the screen. Oh no, did they get back together? He wrote that he was expecting her at his house today and sent her the address. Here you are, sister. 20 minutes later, I was at his house. I knocked and the door opened at the same moment. What if it was part of a prank after all? I told him I'd come for my sister, but Mitch hesitated and said he hadn't seen her in 2 days. It was kind of suspicious. I was worried. Noticing this, Mitch suggested that we look for her together. He called me inside and asked me to wait while he changed. Mitch lived in a cool house with a stylish renovation. There was a studio room on the first floor. I sat down on the bed and looked around. There were posters of athletes, a video game console, pictures of Mitch with some kids. Nothing special, just a strange handle sticking out of the wall. And then I noticed Kaya's bag. Well then, it was definitely a joke. Sister, you can't fool me this time. I needed to play along with Mitch. When he came back, I told him I should probably call cops in case my sister was in danger. I already got my phone out. Suddenly, Mitch asked me if my heart was telling me something. After all, we were sisters and we should have some kind of intuitive connection. Are you kidding me? But I played along and replied that I felt like she was somewhere close. Mitch smiled strangely and said I was right. He jerked a handle on the wall. The bed beneath me parted and I fell down. What was going on? I fell somewhere and hurt myself. What was this place? Then with an effort, I got up and saw Kaya. She was trembling all over. Quite natural, but it was time to end this unfortunate joke. I shook myself off and gloated that I knew that this was just another stupid prank of hers, and I was already calling the police. But where was the phone? Looks like he stayed there. Heck. Kaya started shouting that I was a stupid fool. This wasn't a prank. She and Mitch had been fighting for the past month, and all of a sudden, he'd invited her over. Kaya thought it was an olive branch, but he suddenly pushed her into the basement, and she had been sitting here for 10 hours. It seemed strange to me. But there was one thing I was sure of. Kaya always picks out some assholes. And this one infuriated me especially. Once he even tried to conduct an educational conversation so that my sister and I would be kinder to each other. Mitch really annoyed me. He was weird. Time passed, but Mitch couldn't even be heard. Kaya suddenly started crying and I felt uneasy. Hey, you're actually the eldest. Do you have any ideas on how to get out? Clear, so it was all on me again. I decided to look around. The light came from a small window near the ceiling. I could see that there was nothing in the basement but an old table and a door. I began to study the door. There was a similar lock in my room, which Kaya always unlocked with ease. I hated it, but it might save us now.
Kaya perked up a little, took out a hairpin, and inserted it into the lock, but it immediately bent.
How can you be so clumsy?
I tried to figure out what to do, but Kaya made it difficult to think, tapping her foot nervously, and then I had an idea. I asked Kaya to take off her shoes with the massive heel and tried to knock out the lock with them. My sister watched in silence and was not going to help. She said that she was very sick. Never mind, we'll get out and then I'll show her sick. It went on for more than an hour. I knocked as hard as I could. I couldn't do anything. I sat down against the wall and cried softly. Suddenly, Kaya jumped up and said I was right. It was all hoax. But she was tired of being stuck here, and she had had enough fun watching me to try to get out. She's a real head case.
Only a psychopath could think